This is Into the Story, the podcast where you learn English with true stories from all over the world. Stories that connect us and inspire you to get where you want to go. Hi, it's Bree. While I've been busy recording stories for season 7 of Into the Story, today on New Year's Eve, I want to share something a little different. Normally, this podcast features one story, but today you'll hear a conversation. Earlier this year, I went on Anna Tyrie's podcast, English Like a Native, and we talked about fear. Fear affects many areas of our life, from speaking up in meetings, giving presentations, to just feeling confident in everyday life. As we start a new year, this is the perfect time to think about your goals and how to face your fears so that you can achieve them. By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with practical strategies to overcome fear and feel more empowered in 2025. And before we get into the conversation, in January 2025, I am launching Public Speaking in English. Do you feel nervous speaking English in a meeting, worried that others won't understand your ideas, or perhaps you've held back from pitching your services to a client, even though it could lead to more sales or a better job? Here's the truth. Becoming a powerful speaker isn't about being perfect. It's about learning the right techniques. In this course, I'll teach you step-by-step strategies to speak clearly and confidently. Spots are limited because this is a personalized course where I'll work closely with you. If this sounds like what you need, then click the link in the show notes or visit intothestorypodcast.com/speak. Okay, now let's get into my conversation with Anna Tyrie.
Hi, Bree. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Anna?
I'm very well, thank you. So today's podcast, I thought we'd talk about fear as a topic because fear is something that everyone experiences. And whereas in the past, fear was something that was there to protect us, it now actually in most cases has become a barrier, an obstacle that people have to overcome. And particularly when we're talking about language learning, fear really plays a big part in people's progression. It kind of stops people from progressing. So I thought we'd talk about fear today. To start with, there are a couple of words and terms that come into the topic of fear that sometimes can be confused. So the three terms I'm thinking of, firstly, are anxiety, anxiety, to be anxious, and then the word fear itself, and then the word phobia. So these three words are kind of bandied about when talking about fears. But is there a difference, Bree?
Yeah, I think definitely there's a difference. I think nowadays, anxiety is a word we're used to hearing. We talk a lot about this concept of anxiety, and I think of it more as like a longer state of fear. You know, you're kind of feeling that feeling in your heart. Maybe some people talk about it in their stomach of almost discomfort, almost butterflies. You know, we have this talk about butterflies where it just feels kind of strange and it can feel stressful. It can feel uncomfortable. And I don't think anxiety is very good for us. What do you think?
Yeah, it's something that we can live with long term, isn't it? It's a low level fear that we can function with. So we just go through our day feeling anxious, worried about something, or in some cases, not worried about anything in particular, but still having this sense of anxiety. When I feel anxious, I have the thing you talked about with that feeling in the tummy, like butterflies in the stomach, or that feeling of a turning over of the stomach. I always sense that it's like adrenaline running through my veins and this kind of buzzing, shaky feeling that I just can't shake. There's another phrase, to shake the feeling. So I have a shaky feeling that I just can't shake, I can't get rid of. What kinds of things would make someone feel anxious?
Well, when I think of anxiety in my life these days, I'm a mother of two boys, and they can cause anxiety sometimes.
Yes.
Me and my husband have quite a liberal approach to parenting. We like to let them do as much as they can do and experiment with their bodies. But sometimes when you're at the park and you're watching a 2-year-old climb up a ladder and then hang with one hand, this is a feeling maybe of anxiety, kind of that fear that something could be happening, or the anxiety about, am I doing things well or not well? Also anxiety with work when you have projects that you have to finish. It's kind of this constant, like you just said, a buzzing kind of feeling of adrenaline and cortisol in your body. And you feel unsettled. You don't feel relaxed. You don't have a feeling of well-being. And for me, when I have this feeling, I use yoga and meditation. That's the only thing that calms me down, to kind of just come back to the present moment and think, okay, what happened in the past is not in the present moment. Shouldn't be feared. What's going to come in the future will come, but right now, everything's okay. And reminding myself rationally that everything's okay. What about you? What do you think? What causes anxiety for you?
I'm the same as a mother. I suffer with anxiety related to my children. I do this terrible thing of going to bed and lying there in the moments. I take a long time to go to sleep, usually about 20 to 30 minutes of just lying there. And I tend to fall into catastrophizing. So to catastrophize, think about terrible things that could possibly happen and how I would act in that scenario. And it usually is about my children. So it will be walking my children down the road and a child runs out in front of a car, or being on the top of a cliff and my child falling down off the cliff edge and not knowing what I'd do at that moment. These horrendous things that could possibly happen to my kids. And I do that pretty much every night. So I have this constant anxiety about something bad happening in terms of my child's safety. It gets easier, but separation anxiety is definitely something I struggle with. I think most children struggle with it when they're younger, separating from their parents. But I think parents can struggle with it too, especially when you have your first baby, the first time you let them go into the arms of somebody else. Even if you know and love and trust the other person, you still think something bad will happen because I'm not going to be with my child. So things like that.
Yeah, I can relate to everything that you just said. I don't tend to catastrophize, but just yesterday, so I take my kids swimming on Mondays, and it's like a high anxiety moment because there's the 2-year-old, the 5-year-old, they're jumping in the water. So I'm very alert, like I'm very aware, like holding one, got the arm or leg of the other one. And at the end, we were playing on kind of like the stairs. So both of them touch the bottom of the pool. But I turned around for literally 3 to 5 seconds to start putting on my shoes to leave the pool. And I look back down. And at this moment, my anxiety turned to fear. Like the moment of the adrenaline spiking into your throat or your eyes. I don't know. It has this feeling where it just flashes up. I look down and I see the 2-year-old totally under the water. Like, when a baby gets scared and they just open their arms. If you've ever had a little baby, eyes fully open like this. He had just slipped and fallen, and maybe he was under the water for 1 second, 2 seconds, but it was total fear. It took me a moment to be like, what's happening? And I just took him out and grabbed him. But it's kind of that feeling of alertness, anxiety, then switch to fear. But it's adaptive, isn't it? It helps us.
Yeah, it's there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Your story reminds me of sitting in a rocking chair in my conservatory with the doors shut. It was a cold but sunny day, and my 2 children were out in the garden playing. And we have this big, very deep pond. And they know not to play close to the pond, but they were kind of slightly out of sight. And I was just sitting there. And as I got into my rocking chair with my cup of tea, I thought to myself, if something happens and I have to jump up now, coming out of this rocking chair is going to be quite difficult. And I had that thought. So I'm watching, but they kind of just disappear behind like a building that we have in the garden. And then I hear this huge splash, and I hear my older son screaming in a way that just makes you know something's wrong. You can tell by the tone of a child's voice something is seriously up. So I just knew instantly Caspian, my youngest son, who was 2 at the time, had fallen into the pond. And so I put my tea down because I'd already catastrophized about this. So I knew the first thing I had to do was put down the scalding hot tea and then try and launch myself out of this rocking chair. Now I had socks on, and it's a hard floor, tiled floor. And you know when you see the cartoons when someone's trying to run and their legs are just slipping and their legs are just going round? For about 3 seconds, that was me just trying to run so fast that my legs were just going around and around in circles, and I was making no progress. I wasn't moving. And then I fell, and I slipped and fell flat down on the floor. Got up again, ran out, grabbed my child, and pulled him out of the pond. And he was fine. He was a bit shocked and had a few scrapes and bruises. He was fine. But I think that fear is there to make you act quickly. It sends the blood, the adrenaline to the places where it needs to be, makes your brain fire quickly. It makes you super strong, makes your limbs work. And so fear is useful on those occasions, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. And fear is one of these emotions that has roots very, very deep, deep, deep in our evolutionary psychology and physiology from the days that we were, hunting in a forest and had to run away from bears or lions. And you can kind of feel it because when you do have that fear, when you respond in fear, you're extra fast. I mean, if you can get grip on the floor when you're trying to run, but you are very quick and strong. But of course, it can be a problem if it turns to a phobia, or if you're dealing with prolonged anxiety. It's just this constant state of discomfort, which we know isn't good for us.
Yeah, our body isn't meant to take those kind of stress hormones long term. It's not built for that. And so it does have detrimental effects, as well as effects on our diet, because we can't eat in the same way when we're stressed and anxious, and our sleep, which we also know is so important. But what is a phobia? So a phobia is it's usually focused on one thing, isn't it?
Yeah, a phobia. I don't think that I have any phobias, but my understanding of the word phobia is like a very, very intense fear, and usually irrational.
Yes.
And just like a very strong aversion to something.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any phobias?
I don't, but I did. So I had a couple of the typical phobias. I used to have a severe phobia of needles. And so whenever I had to have an injection or blood taken, I would be freaking out. I'd get clammy palms. I'd be shaking. I'd feel sick. And the thing that changed it for me was a psychological switch. I remember seeing a documentary about a guy with leukemia. He was only early 20s. When you are in need of blood, when you need a blood donation or a bone marrow donation, it has to come obviously from your blood type. And this guy was like, look, I need more people to come forward and donate blood to see if we can find a bone marrow donor for me, because I need a bone marrow donation or I'm going to die. And they were out on the street and trying to get people to donate blood, saying, could you just do a little blood test? Would you think of donating blood? Can you help? And people were saying no because they were scared of needles. These people could potentially save this man's life, but they're scared of needles, so they're not going to do it. And that made me think how silly my fear of needles was, when you can think of like the pros of me donating blood, how many people I could help if I donated blood. And actually I have a slightly more rare blood type. I'm a B positive, which is about 15% of the population.
I'm also B positive.
Are you? We have so much in common.
We do.
It's crazy. So I think our blood type is about 15%, and we help people with sickle cell anemia. And so I started taking myself to donate blood, and they're quite big needles they use for the blood donation. And from that point on, I'm now okay with needles. I don't like them. I don't think anyone does, but I'm okay. Now, the other phobias are things like fear of heights, fear of deep water. So I started climbing, I started scuba diving and dealt with those.
It sounds like you do like exposure therapy where you like
Yes.
go to the thing that makes you afraid
Yeah.
and you do it often. And okay.
The silliest fear I've ever had was a phobia of wet tea bags, used tea bags. And this all comes from, I'm a tea drinker. I'm British. I love
I was
a cup
going to
of
say,
tea.
Anna, this has got to be the most British thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a bad dream one night that I was chewing on a wet tea bag. And even just saying that makes me feel a little bit like queasy. But I had this dream, and sometimes in my dream, I don't know if you have this, I feel like I sense using other senses. So I feel like I can smell and taste in my dreams.
Wow. I don't have that.
It's very odd. I went through this period of having these bad dreams where there were things that had very strong tastes and smells, like petrol and things, and I was ingesting them. And it really gave me an aversion to certain things. So I don't like being in a petrol station because of the smell, because I had a bad dream about drinking petrol. Oh, it's very odd. But yeah, I dreamt about chewing on a wet tea bag, and it made me feel really nauseous when I woke up. And then the next time I saw a wet tea bag, I was like, oh my goodness me, get that out of my sight. I can't look at it. Every time I'd see it, it would make me feel sick to a point where my mouth was watering. And this went on for months and months and months. I just couldn't look at or handle wet tea bags. Other people had to make me tea and take the tea bag out of my cup. Sometimes when you go to hotels or cafes, they would serve your tea, and we have tea with milk here. So you can't see the tea bag in the cup because of the milk. But usually the tea bag is strained and taken out quite quickly. But sometimes they serve it to you in hotels and cafes with the tea bag still in, so you can have it at the strength you like. And if you ever go to take a sip of tea with a tea bag still in there and you get it up against your lips, if you are afraid of wet tea bags, it's the worst thing. It's the worst thing ever. The way I got over that was when I first moved to London. I was taking any job going because I just needed the money, and I was working for an agency where they'd send you to different places doing like hosting work, waitressing work, welcoming work. And I did one where I was a tea lady in like a solicitor's firm, and I had to make these huge vats of tea and then take away the old ones and empty them, and there'd be like 10 tea bags in the bottom, and I'd have to empty them and take them out of the sink, and I just had to deal with my issue. I'm okay now, but if anyone still, my partner sometimes teases me and puts a wet tea bag close to my face. I'm just like, just don't. just don't. Just keep it away from me.
I would definitely, I mean, I wouldn't classify it maybe as a phobia, but it is a bit irrational.
Yeah, I describe it as an irrational fear.
But for me, I think I have one thing that I don't like, and maybe this is common. I know my sister has it. It's the drain of a pool. Okay?
Right, okay.
So when I go to the pool, I will avoid the lane that I'll have to swim over the drain.
Oh, is that because you're worried about it sucking you in?
I don't really know. Have you seen the movie It?
Yes.
Okay, I think it comes
that
from
film.
there. It's so scary.
Yeah.
I think it comes from there. Like, I would never go and like touch a drain. But maybe that's normal. Like, does anyone want to touch a drain? I don't know.
I don't know. Isn't that crazy? So it scarred me as a child.
Okay, yeah, it scarred me.
Yeah.
And like, I was afraid of letting the water out of the bath.
Really?
That sound of it going down, I was like, oh, that was terrifying.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how a film, one story, can have such a deep impact, long-lasting impact on you?
That's also, I mean, that is the power of stories. I know that you are a very gifted storyteller, and you're a trained storyteller and actress. And I love stories, obviously, the podcast.
Yeah.
But stories, they can mark our brains. We actually, when we're listening to a story that we're really into, that we're really feeling the emotions, it's just that our brains use what's called mirror neurons, and we're mirroring the emotion happening in the story. So if it's something scary, we can get so into a story that we actually feel that we're there. And then that almost, it marks us. You know, when I think about that clown from it. I feel that fear. Like I feel that feeling of total terror.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, we don't watch horror films anymore. My partner is just completely against horror films. He's like, I don't want to feel scared. There's enough going on in my life to worry about. I don't want to feel scared about something that's not necessary. So for the time that we've been together, which is a long time now, we haven't watched a horror film. And now I'm almost at the point where I'm scared to watch a horror film because it's been so long and I'd probably have to watch it on my own. So yeah, we don't do horror films.
I used to love them when I was younger until like 18. But now I can't watch them. Like I feel the same way. Like why would I want to expose myself to feeling afraid when I have enough stress in my daily life?
Yeah.
But I just don't enjoy them. Maybe it's something that comes with age. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was younger, I always wanted to watch something that either made me laugh out loud, cry, or feel scared. It's like this need to feel something, to feel a connection with the story that I was watching. Okay, so a few other words that I would use when talking about fear on the flip side of fear would be resilience. So building up that resilience, which is the capacity to recover or to deal with these difficult times. The resilience is like being tough, isn't it?
Yeah, I think of it like that. Being tough, being able to deal with fear.
Like a nice phrase is to be thick-skinned. Which
That's
we
a good
use.
one.
It's like your skin is so thick, nothing can pierce it. So you can deal with hardship and attack. I think when you work online, you certainly have to build up a level of resilience because you're putting yourself out there to be criticized and to be judged by complete strangers who have the ability to just say whatever they want. Initially, I found that quite hurtful and difficult because I felt quite vulnerable. And that's it. That's another word that we'd use a lot around this subject is vulnerability, to be vulnerable, which is that feeling of exposure. Did you ever feel vulnerable when you first came online and into the public forum?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I am not a thick-skinned person. I'm certainly more thick-skinned. I'm more resilient now than I first was. I remember before I came online, but I was just working. Me and my husband have an academy, and we opened it first as a physical brick and mortar space. It was an actual academy, and I remember this feeling of wanting everyone to be happy and wanting to give your best. A woman came in. She was a mother, and I had initially told her that we had a class for her 2 sons. I remember very well. She had thick, short, curly black hair, very black. And she came in and I had to tell her, actually, we don't have a class in the end. We couldn't put together the group, whatever. She really yelled at me, really, really, really yelled at me. And I felt so vulnerable and so attacked that actually to this day, I have an aversion. I do not like curly, dark-haired women. They make me afraid. Yes. I think they're going to be mean. And it's just this crazy thing. But no, I'm definitely someone who I like podcasting because it feels less exposure. I'm not one to feel very comfortable being out on social media and YouTube. I am doing it a little bit more now, but it can feel scary to have, your self out there for people to say whatever they wish. But I think the way that I kind of deal with it now is just not really reading anything, not really looking at things. But I know for you, because the story that you told on my podcast is about singing, you described this moment at one point where you felt like maybe your voice wasn't great, and then someone told you something that confirmed that. And isn't that kind of funny that a lot of us are very afraid of using our voices, specifically singing? Why do you think that is, that we feel so exposed to sing or use our voice in front of people? Public speaking, for example, or singing specifically. Go ahead, sorry.
With singing specifically, there's a science behind it. When we cry, our larynx tilts forward into what we call the cry position. In tilting forward, it stretches our vocal folds. So when our vocal folds are stretched, they sound like this. So when people cry, It's because the larynx is tilting and stretching. And so when we cry, we tend to talk like this. And that's the same position that you are in for the majority of singing, what we call legit singing. So when we sing like this. And that's the same as when we cry. Okay, so that tilt is the same position. I've often been in a room when I'm teaching singing or when I'm with other singers in a very exposed class, and they have to get up and sing something they feel uncomfortable with and they're not used to singing. You see people cry, they get up and they really work on this tilt position and they just start crying. And if you ask them why they're crying, they'll say, I don't know. And the thing is, if you smile, you tell your body in some way, I'm smiling, I'm happy. That's why people are told, even if you don't feel happy, smile, because you're telling your brain, we're happy, let's release happy hormones. And it's the same for tilting your larynx. You tilt your larynx and you start to feel sad. You tell your brain, oh, we're crying, we're upset, we're crying. Let's send tears. Let's send all those things that we normally send for crying.
And feeling vulnerable, perhaps.
And feeling vulnerable. So we feel in the same position as we would if we're crying. And so that's a part of it, is that putting your voice into that tilt position, which we wouldn't normally do. It's like people feel afraid to actually, adults, not children, feel afraid to scream and shout. I know this because of being with actors who are generally quite confident people, willing to try anything, and doing scream workshops, and people being scared to actually scream. It's because it's normally something we do when we're in a very heightened, frightening situation. So being asked to scream just randomly is quite a big thing to ask someone to do. It's like, well, I'm not in that mode. I'm not fearful at the moment. And also, I think, just raising your voice, singing out loud, you're both putting yourself out to be judged, because we all love to listen to a singer. So we're being judged, but also you're just making yourself heard. It's making yourself big. Yeah. And for many people, that doesn't come naturally. Most of us just want to fit in.
Yeah, to fit in, to be safe. And all of these things come back, I think, to fear, really, of this evolutionary kind of mechanism of wanting to be safe in our cave, away from the bears. This thing that you said about screaming or raising your voice, I have this in yoga, this feeling as well of when you do the Om. At first, it was very hard because it's kind of like raising your voice and singing, and it has to be very consistent.
Yeah.
And
so you're talking about when they ask you to make a constant
exactly
noise,
and then dragging it out, and like all the way until the end. And you can kind of get the feeling for other people in the classroom, the kind of type of person they are. I mean, some people like really Om, and wow, they're really full and present in their body, and they're comfortable in their space, and other people who can't make that sound. And it's kind of hard to raise your voice up over others and say, this is my voice, this is who I am. You feel very exposed.
Yeah, you reminded me of being a child, and I'd go to church and people would be singing in church. The organ would start up and you get some people going,
was that you?
I did it. I've always enjoyed choral singing. Often I wouldn't know the tune, because they have all these, I don't know, hymns and things that some people know very well. I didn't. So I'd just be kind of singing along, hoping to get the right tune. But you would always have the people at the front singing really loudly and going for it. And you're like, wow. And then you have the timid people who are just moving their lips and there's nothing coming out of their mouth. And you're like, hang on a minute. Are you singing or are you miming?
Exactly.
Yeah. But that brings me to think of another word that's quite interesting. It's the word to overcome. To overcome something. The reason I think this is interesting is to overcome something is to succeed in dealing with it. So if you have a fear or a phobia and you face it, you confront it, so you go and deal with it, then you have overcome that fear. You've literally jumped over it. You've overcome that hurdle. But then there's another phrase, to be overcome by an emotion, or to be overcome by something. And that's different. That's almost to have to surrender to something. So you could say, I was overcome with anxiety, or I was overcome with joy. So it's usually to do with emotions, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a common collocation to be overcome with joy.
Yeah.
That you, exactly like you said, you surrender to it.
Yeah. It's like a wave of emotion and you just go, I'm not going to fight this. I'm just going to let it just take me. It's just so overwhelming. I can't deal with it. I'm overcome with it. But you overcome your problems, but emotions can overcome you.
Well, I have a thing that I've been trying to overcome, and it's actually a wave, literally.
Right.
Yes, I have a fear of surfing. Now, it's not like something I would describe as a fear. When I think about surfing, I would love to be able to do it better and more often. But when I get to the space of surfing, my body takes over. You know, my amygdala, that animal brain back here, takes over, and I don't get as much blood to my frontal cortex, which is more about planning and thinking and rational thought. Now, just a little bit of context. My husband is a surfer. It's his love, his joy, his passion, something that he cannot live without. That's why we live in Spain on the coast and not in central Canada, because he would just die if I took him there. And when I met him, I had gone surfing a few times back home in Canada and also in Portugal. And it's something I really loved. I love swimming. I'm a very strong swimmer. I love being in the sea, in the ocean. It just seemed like something we could do together, you know, when you first meet someone and love and you picture your future together. We would surf and we'd be together. And the reality was different because something happened that I can't describe, is that I just got really scared. And I tried a lot. So for the first 7 years of our relationship together before we had kids, I would really try to keep up with him, to keep at the same pace. Now, he's like a very good surfer and I'm not a good surfer, but I can get on a board and take a wave. And we would go on small waves here in the Mediterranean. We would go to big waves in Indonesia. One of the biggest waves that I went on was in Simeulue, which is off of the north coast of Sumatra. And I would kind of do what you did, this exposure type therapy, like going a little bit each time, but not pushing myself to the point where I got afraid. And then at a certain point, I kind of just was overcome by the fear and I just stopped. And I haven't been back in the water since my second was born. And now when I think about it, my husband will say, oh, today's the perfect day for you. Like, let's go to the beach all together and you go and I'll stay with the kids. And I'm like, no. I don't want, like, don't even ask me. Like, the feeling of being able to go and then not doing it, even though I know I want to do it, makes me angry. So I just avoid it altogether. Total avoidance. So
that's really sad. I feel really sad for you that you've lost that ability to face that. Do you think that if your partner was able to say, hey, let's go out together, if someone else was looking after the kids, do you think that would be an opportunity that you take if you weren't going out on your own?
Yes, probably, because I'm more comfortable. It would be a way to start again. Because when you're surfing, there's a lot of variables. There's
sharks.
There's no sharks here, but,
Okay.
But just thinking about the waves here, you know, in the Mediterranean, the waves are small usually, unless there's a huge storm. But there's a lot of surfers. So the few waves there are here, there's a lot of surfers. So there's that element of worrying about, maybe it's something similar to this thing of singing. Like, I don't want to get in the way of real surfers doing their thing.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of having your board and going under, duck diving under waves, the feeling of losing control of my board and it hitting me or hitting someone else. But if I went with my husband, he could maybe like help me, you know, like push me into the wave, like do things that he did when I was a total beginner and I could kind of start again. I don't know. I think that would maybe be an option. Maybe that's a good idea, to go with some friends and they can watch the kids.
Yeah. Or maybe switch to paddle boarding or something that maybe is better suited.
Yeah, no, I do paddleboarding all the time, but yeah.
Yeah, I think as we get older, and I think when you become a parent, there definitely is this like level of caution that's introduced that maybe you didn't have before.
Mhm.
I'm much more cautious now than I ever have been, and maybe a little bit more fearful of things than I would have been before having children. I think
Yeah,
you just become more aware of your own mortality once you have kids.
definitely. I remember when my first was born, that was strangely an overcoming feeling of my own mortality, but almost a relief in the sense that I felt at that point, and I still feel like, okay, now I don't have to worry so much about my mortality because I don't matter. I want him to be okay, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
What you said reminds me of my sister. I have two sisters. I'm the youngest, but the middle one, she's the bravest person I know.
Right.
She is like fearless, all sorts of crazy things. She has twins and she drove, well, this is only like very brave if you're a parent, but she drove her two 5-year-old twins in a van with a trailer from Calgary, Canada, down to St. Louis, where she lives. That's like
Wow.
30 hours
Oh my goodness
with
me.
twins. Anyways, skydiving, doing all sorts of things. But she told a story on the podcast where she does deep sea diving and totally not prepared. Like she was a diver, but she didn't check her second oxygen tank. All sorts of things. She runs out of oxygen. It's a huge problem. In any case, at the end, I say like, so Andrea, what's the moral of the story? She's like, well, now that I'm a parent, I'm more cautious. And that really is what it took for her to become more cautious and not so
Yeah.
brave in terms of doing scary, fearful things, was to have children. But now
Yeah.
that she's a parent, she does these things like drive 30 hours with her 5-year-olds. She does like brave mom things.
I'm often inspired by other parents who are just seemingly coping, doing things that I think are too difficult. Like, well,
Yeah.
if you can do it, then I can do it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that one of my fears would be that I couldn't handle my own children. So I
Mm.
always try to do things that feel difficult and, taking them to the pool alone or just, things that I feel are difficult to show that I can handle them.
Yeah.
I can deal with it and not being so afraid of what other people think because
Mm-hmm.
often when we're out there, I look like chaotic and crazy and I'd be like, well, that's just the way it is. That's my
Yeah.
life right now. And they're children and I'm just, making sure that they're alive. That's
Yeah.
my standard at the current time.
Yeah. I was in the pool not long ago and I often struggle with my two boys, similar age to yours. And I often struggle if I'm alone with them. I'm very mild mannered and I like things to be very minimal and controlled. And my children are loud and they are just like whirlwinds. And so they are completely opposite to me and how I like to live my life. So they really test me all the time. And I struggle. Like, you talk about taking them swimming, and I know how hard it is to take two young children swimming when you're on your own. And the coping, the logistics of everything and keeping them alive. And then I was sitting in the little hot tub at the end of our swimming pool, and this lady gets in, and then her children all start piling in. And she had 3 sets of twins, and she's on her own. She's got 6 kids. I don't know if she's alone in life, but she was on her own in the pool. And they probably range from about 12 down to 6. And so 6 children. And I just looked at them all and she seemed so relaxed. And I was like, this is amazing. I would love to have a huge family. It's not on the cards for us, but I would love to have a big family like that. And I thought, but it must be a nightmare for her. And then I saw her in the changing rooms, just kind of standing guard while she was organising them to all have the showers, get their clothes, get dried, get dressed. And she was, completely organised, completely cool and calm. And all the children were like, Mummy, 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 this, that. And I was in my head going, I couldn't cope with all this noise. And she's just like, towels there, clothes are there, showers there, wash your hair, dry your feet, put your shoes on. She just had it all in hand. And I thought, I cannot complain about struggling with my 2 kids when she is managing fine with 6. That's just
Yeah.
mental, inspirational, but mental.
Mm.
You mentioned quite a few times about Canada. That's where you're from, but you're living in Spain. So talk to me about this transition, moving over to Spain. How was that for you?
Well, I can say that when I moved here, which is a long time ago now, it was 13 years ago, I was completely and utterly naive, which is, I think, the best way to go into most adventures.
Yeah.
Because if you're not a little bit naive, then a lot of us wouldn't do things because we think I'm safe here in my cave. I don't want to go and go out there and be exposed and put myself into uncomfortable, fearful positions. But in fact, that's what happened. So I was traveling around Europe, doing what lots of North Americans like to do. After university, put on our backpacks and travel around and see the world and discover ourselves. So that's what I did. And at the end of my trip, I thought I would love to spend a year in Spain. I loved Barcelona, so I'll just go back there. And I'd have always wanted to learn Spanish. And, I thought of it like just like a little detail. Like, I'll pay for a course and I'll learn Spanish in 3 months and that'll be that. And then I'll get a job and I'll just live my life and drink cafe and, do what Spanish people do. So I got here and I got to my first class, my Spanish class, and I was like the worst student. I was terrible. I didn't know how to learn another language, which is really common with us monolinguals, which is most of the English-speaking world, Canada, the US, the UK, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. We tend to only speak English, which is probably has a lot of reasons, but it's because a lot of other people speak English, so we're never forced to learn another language. So I didn't even know how to get my mind around language learning. Like, what's a verb? What's a noun? What are we talking about? And it was at that point that I also had, for the first time, like this meta-linguistic awareness of like what it means to be myself in another language and what it means to speak another language, how other people are going to perceive me when we only ever operate in our own native language. We're used to just being able to show who we are without there being like a language barrier, right? So we don't have to worry that people aren't going to see who we really are. And that was the biggest fear for me when I started learning and started speaking Spanish, say going to a party. And my language skills allowed me to say what I had for lunch that day. Whereas I was like, no, but I'm actually like a normal person. Like, I don't want you to think I'm not intelligent, not like I'm a genius, but I just want you to see me, really.
Like the difference between being like a 3D version of yourself and a 2D version of yourself.
And unfortunately, that can happen when there's a language barrier and you just don't see the person. You don't see who they really are because they can't communicate it with you. And then I can say that a fear that I had for a very, very long time, and it's so silly, maybe it's even in the realm of phobia, was making phone calls in Spanish.
Right.
And it was like the fear that I would call and we would have a problem, something in the communication. When you're in person, you've got your hands, you can point, you can, there's a lot of oral agility skills that you can do. You can kind of explain it this way or explain it that way, but when you can't see the person, when you're just using your voice, it feels very scary. And it was terrifying for me. And still, I'm very ashamed to say this, but if it's me and my husband and we have to call the school or call, I don't know, somewhere, call the phone company to renegotiate something, I'll try to make him do it for me. Okay. And he's like, no, you're not this. No. You speak perfect Spanish. You're not going to make me make your phone calls for you.
You can't get out of it. You can't get
out of it. But yeah, it was very difficult, but it gets better with time. And little by little, speaking more and more, practicing more and more is, I can say, as my experience as a language learner and also someone who has taught lots and lots of students over 10 years, the only way to get better at speaking and listening. And a lot of us have a fear of it. I can say probably 95% of students are the ones who hold in instead of just like, whatever, I'll just say it. The only way to get over it is doing it. The only way, and starting with passive So listening to podcasts, watching movies, starting with that skill and then speaking more and just looking for opportunities is the only way to get over that fear and just get more comfortable and face it. And it's the only way to cope. So yeah.
So that's like exposure therapy.
That's kind of like, yeah, exposure therapy. I think we both have that thing of if I'm afraid of something, then I need to go out and do it.
Go and face it, confront it.
Exactly. Confronting your fears. They won't get easier if you just avoid them.
No. Lots of people online talk about the importance of students making mistakes. So you'll tend to see videos and shorts of people saying like, you've got to make mistakes. Don't avoid mistakes. Mistakes are how you learn, how you grow. And the same goes for being vulnerable. Like you say, you've just got to go out there and do it. My children, and you probably have the same, watching them develop their language is so fascinating as a language teacher. Seeing how like little inhibition they have. They're not nervous or scared, even when I correct them 1,000 times. So like my eldest son, who's 5, is struggling with irregular verbs. So he will say, what's he say? Goad. I goad.
Yeah.
When I goad to school, and so I'll correct him when I went to. And so I'm not saying what you've said is wrong, but I always just repeat and give him the correct version. And then he'll repeat again, when I went to school. But he struggles with that a lot, but he's never embarrassed or he doesn't feel ashamed when I correct him. He doesn't shy away from saying anything. It's just this, okay, well, you got the message and you corrected me and I've taken the correction. I might forget it. I might remember it. Who knows? But I'm just going to keep speaking. And it's that just lack of care works really well for him and for, everyone learning a language. I think we all learn how to walk. We just keep, even if we're wobbly and we're falling over, we just keep doing it. And eventually we can all walk. Obviously able-bodied and with no issues, we all learn to walk. And it's the same with speaking. You just have to keep going and doing it, right?
Exactly. You have to. And yeah, kids, like you said, are an amazing model to look at that they don't. It's funny, like people, and myself included, are very fearful of being corrected or saying the wrong thing, Something as silly in Spanish as using the wrong ending, like the masculine or feminine, like mixing something like that up. It's very easy to happen, but when it happens, you feel embarrassed. Maybe now I wouldn't because I'm just used to making mistakes. But I think the best thing you can do as a language learner, and perhaps a human, from my humble opinion, is getting comfortable making mistakes.
Yeah. And I think that's a fantastic place to end this discussion today.
Wonderful.
So face your fears and just enjoy being in your own skin. Be courageous. Overcome those things that are holding you back, especially if it's having an impact on your life, like not being able to enjoy surfing with your partner and your family. That's definitely something to tackle and overcome.
I'm going to get out there and do that. Find someone to watch my kids, and I'm going to get back on that wave.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Bree, it's been an absolute joy having you here. So thank you for accepting my invitation and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
And to my listeners, take very good care and goodbye.
Bye. Thanks so much for listening. I hope that you found this conversation helpful. Anna is such a wonderful person to speak to, and she's also an incredible storyteller. In fact, she shared one of my favorite stories on Into the Story, episode 56, Imposter Syndrome. Anna Tyrie is the founder of the YouTube channel, podcast, and website English Like a Native. I will leave you a link to check out her channel in the description below. I'm busy working on season 7, and I cannot wait to bring you new stories that I know you'll love. Don't forget to follow the show so that you never miss a new episode. For more free resources, including learning packs for each episode, visit intothestorypodcast.com. And if 2025 is the year that you're ready to become the kind of speaker who inspires others and unlocks new opportunities, then join the waitlist for my course, Public Speaking in English. Visit intothestorypodcast.com/speak. Okay, folks, that's all for today. Until next time, I hope that you have a good time, or at least a good story to tell.